Hi, my name is Jana Laiz, and I'm an author from the Berkshires. And I want to thank Sherry Steiner and CTSB for inviting me to this Solo Creatives. So I would like to talk a little bit about my books. I have many, as you can see. I consider myself a writer with a purpose. I'm trying to change the world one book at a time, if I can, for the better. I started writing when I was a very tiny child. I was about 6 when my mother gave me her old marbled notebook, and my grandfather, who was a dentist, gave me a tiny little pencil. And with that and a big idea, I began to write. And I wrote The Fuzzy Wuzzy Rabbit. It was my first book. It's not published, and it probably never will or should be. In any case, I wasn't really thinking about becoming a writer. I love to write, so I spend my whole life writing, but it was more for fun. I am a teacher. I was a refugee resettlement caseworker. And when the tsunami hit in 2004, the huge South Asian tsunami, I wanted a way to raise money for tsunami relief. And I heard this amazing story of these 8 elephants who saved 50 people from drowning in the tsunami. And I did my research and I found out that it was true. And so I wrote this book in order to raise money for tsunami relief, Elephants of the Tsunami. And that came out in 2005, and I was sort of then on a roll. My next book is called Weeping Under This Same Moon, and this is the fictionalized, it's a true story, it's my story of a very unhappy teenagehood in New York when the character Hannah sees a news report about Vietnamese refugees. This is in the 70s, 77, and decides to do something about it and become a volunteer. And so I wrote this book, and it's in 2 parts. Part 1 is May, the Vietnamese refugee woman, and part 2 is Hannah, the American high school student. It won the Book of the Year award. It's won a lot of awards, and it's currently in development for film. I'm very excited about it, and I wrote the script, and I'll read a little bit in a little bit. The next book that I wrote, I co-authored with Anne Elizabeth Barnes. It's called A Free Woman on God's Earth. This is the true story of Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman, and you may have heard of her. She was an enslaved African woman who lived in Sheffield, Massachusetts. She was owned by John and Hannah Ashley. And John Ashley was one of the writers of the Sheffield Resolves, where they were penning words of freedom, and it was actually the precursor to the Declaration of Independence. And the words, all men are created free and equal, were read in that study where she served. And she heard those words, and she realized that that freedom meant nothing to her. But she decided to sue for her freedom when the Massachusetts Constitution was ratified in 1780, and she won. She sued for her freedom, and she won. And because of her case, which happened in Great Barrington in the court of law, Massachusetts banned slavery 2 years later, 80 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. There's now, we do a Mumbet Walk to Freedom every year, and there's now a beautiful statue in the town of Sheffield commemorating her life. And it's also optioned to be a film, and it's heavily in development, so we're moving forward quickly with that film. The next book I wrote is called The 12th Stone. And this is an eco-fantasy that Bill McKibben, who is the founder of 350.org, the man who kind of coined the phrase climate change, endorsed. He said it was lovely, reminding us of what's really important. And it's kind of a Celtic fantasy, fairy tale adventure about climate change and being stewards of the planet. And it won a few awards as well. Then I will show you Thomas and Autumn. Is the story of a little boy named Thomas. He's actually from Sheffield. He's a real boy, and his chicken, Autumn. And it contains 4-H values, and it's about a little boy who raises money to buy a chicken, and the chicken follows him all around. And then, if you've ever been to the Red Lion Inn, you may have seen Simon. Simon was a rescue from Sonsini Animal Shelter, and he became the lobby ambassador at the Red Lion Inn Hotel in Stockbridge, and he took people to their rooms, and people actually would come all the way to the Red Lion just to meet Simon. So I wrote that. Then in 2012, I had the incredible privilege and honor of becoming the very first writer in residence at Herman Melville's home, Arrowhead, in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I get to sit at his desk where he wrote Moby Dick, looking out his window at Mount Greylock, and I get to write. and I wrote this story called Billy Budd in the Bread Box. It's the story of Herman Melville and his granddaughter Eleanor, who really was instrumental in bringing him back to life. Because when Herman died, he died in obscurity. Nobody read Melville. Nobody knew about Moby Dick, really. And she found something in the bread box, Billy Budd, and published it. It came out in 1924 to rave reviews, and people began to remember 70 years earlier this book called Moby Dick by Melville. And that is why he is famous today. It's because of his love for his granddaughter and her love for him. Then I have a wonderful friend named Sean Vernon, excuse me, who is a singer-songwriter. And unfortunately, he has MS. And he was making an album for children, a lullaby album. And he and I wrote a poem together called Blanket of Stars. And he fell, and he was unable to get back into the studio due to his disease. And so I said, you know, you have 5 songs. Why don't we take them and make a book out of them? And I'm going to play you the song. We wrote this together, A Blanket of Stars, and it's just a lullaby book for children. And my latest book is called 35 Days to Baltimore, or 35 Días de Camino a Baltimore, and it's co-authored by Alexis Portillo. He's a Honduran immigrant, and when he was 17 years old, as an unaccompanied minor, he made his way from poverty-stricken and very violent village in Honduras to the border and across into Baltimore. And it's the story of this incredibly harrowing journey, and it's actually bilingual. So we have one in Spanish. It starts in English and goes to Spanish, or it starts in Spanish and goes to English. So it's great for people who are learning Spanish or people who are learning English, both. And it is the true story. And I'd like to read a little bit of this first. I'll start with this, and I'm going to go through some of my books and read. So if you'll have me, I will start. "35 Days to Baltimore." People often ask me why I came to the United States. Why would I leave the only life I knew, my family, my friends, my parents, and my home, to embark on a dangerous journey to an uncertain future? There are no easy answers, so I answer their question with a question. If you lived in a house made of dirt with a roof that leaked, a toilet, out in the open fields, no privacy, no cover, not to mention the poisonous snakes that lurked in the field, and slept on a mat on a hard dirt floor in one room with 9 people, and the only future you could count on was trying to scratch a living from growing corn, and you knew that you shouldn't even dream because what would be the point? Would you stay? Those people look at me with something between shock and understanding. What I don't tell them is how dangerous it was to live in my village. Indiscriminate murders, gang violence, rapes of young girls on their way to school, no clean water, instead collecting drinking water from polluted rivers, being hungry, being always fearful, fearful of walking to school, of going out to play, of a life that felt dangerous and hopeless. These things I keep to myself until now. Now, when friends and strangers, people who have done nothing wrong except tried to find a better life, are being taken away, separated from family, disrespected, jailed, and discriminated against, I am hoping my story will change hearts, if not minds. It was the salty water on my tongue that woke me, or maybe it was the dream. I wiped the wetness off my face and tried to bring back the images that stirred up so much emotion, enough to make me cry while I slept. In my dream, I was waving goodbye to my family as I made my way down a long road away from them, from all I knew and loved. In the dream, my mother was crying, reaching for me, knowing she might never see me again. Her arms became longer like a fast-growing vine as she reached out for me. Her voice was hollow as if she was calling from a tube. "Hijo, no vayas, por favor, don't leave." In my dream, I turned to see them all, long arms reaching in vain. "Mommy, I am going to come back." In my dream, I refused to shed a tear. I held them in tightly. It was still dark and hot. I threw my scratchy blanket off me and tried not to wake my mother, who was next to me, breathing raggedly. I put on my rubber slippers and quietly left the hut. I didn't have to walk far to relieve myself, and as I stood there in the still dark morning, I looked up at the sky and asked God to take care of my family when I left. My mother stirred as I came back in. At some point during the night, she lay down beside me and cried herself to sleep, her arms wrapped protectively around me. I had fallen asleep to those sobs. I saw my small bag leaning against the cement wall. Today, I was leaving. So that's the beginning of 35 Days to Baltimore. And it follows Alex's journey all the way from Baltimore, from Honduras to Baltimore, where he actually is, and he's wonderful, and he's living in Texas now. He's a family man with 4 children, and he's doing fine. It's a beautiful story. It just won a literary award. I'm very proud of this story. I would like to read you a little bit of Weeping Under This Same Moon, which is probably my most popular book at this point. It's read in many, many high schools and middle schools, colleges. Berkshire Community College and MCLA used it as their freshman read, and it was just a huge honor. So I'm going to read you a little bit of May and a tiny little bit of Hannah. Part 1 is May. I wait for the man in white to come for us. He will come in the dead of night when all is still, when the cicadas are singing and the moon is low in the night sky. We have paid for our journey with bars of gold, and he will take us to the boat that will be our home until we get to where we will be safe. But I am not sure we will find safety anywhere. My friend left before me, and she was not safe. I want to cry for her, who is lost to me forever. They sent her away, and her boat was captured by pirates. I was told how she bravely jumped over the side before they had their brutal way with her. Now she is gone, beneath the China Sea, food for the fish and the sharks, and I will never see her again. Never again will I tell her my secret dreams and desires. Never will I walk with her and drink lemonade. Never will we learn English together like we had planned, nor meet one day in New York City, the place we dream of going. My parents will send me with only my 14-year-old brother and tiny sister. My younger sister is too small to carry her own case, so I must carry one for both of us. And so I cannot take my paints or my brushes. I can only take a small case filled with one change of clothing and our toothbrushes. My parents told me I must sacrifice my pleasures to help them. I tried to explain that my paints and brushes were not for pleasure, but something I needed, perhaps more than I needed clothing or a toothbrush. This made them angry, and so I put my paints and my brushes into a large wisteria case and buried it in our garden under the wisteria. If the soldiers loot our house when we are gone, they will not find it, and one day I will come back for it. One day when Vietnam is the happy place I remember from when I was as small as my young sister is now. I lie in my bed, the mosquito net making everything look hazy, and watch as a bat flies past the moon. I will miss this room, my sister's soft breathing as they sleep, the pictures from the fashion magazines I cut out and paste on the wall next to my small bed. I will miss the smells of my village, the pungent smell of lemongrass and steamed dumplings, cellophane noodle soup simmering with fish freshly caught from the ocean. I will miss the longan fruit and star fruit native to our country. I will miss the café thin, the sweet coffee our country is famous for, and I am now finally allowed to drink. Mostly I will miss my paints and bamboo brushes made of the finest horsehair. But I know we must leave. It is not safe for us anymore. We are of Chinese origin, and we are not welcomed here any longer, even though we have called Vietnam our home for many generations. The war is over, but all that remains of our life is this house, which they will soon take from us. My father's once thriving business is worthless, and our wealth is gone. We have only the hidden golden bars for our journey to the West. How ironic. They want us to leave, yet they make us pay to do so. And so I wait for the man in white, each day anticipating his arrival, and each night relieved that he hasn't come. But he will come soon, I know, and I must be ready to go when he does. That's a little bit of May. And then Hannah is a little bit different. Let's find Hannah. High school is the bane of my existence. Truly, I hate it. I mean, really hate it. My teachers are awful, the classes are boring, and I have no friends, and lunchtime is the worst, especially in winter. And except for lunch, because I can't eat outside by myself, I love winter. You know, you've seen the picture of one kid out on the school lawn under a tree. That's me. And it's fine, except in winter. In winter, I've got to go somewhere during that 37-minute endless stretch of time that is called lunch period. So I go into the library and try to eat in the stacks, but the librarian always catches me. She hates me, I know. That's because last year they weren't going to let me graduate from 10th grade unless I paid some overdue fine. I swear I had returned those books, but no passing until the fine was paid. So I brought in a brown paper bag full of pennies and plopped it right on her desk. It was all there, every greasy cent of what she said I owed. Legal tender. Anyway, now she has it in for me. So my one safe haven is now off limits. I can't eat in the halls. My guidance counselor always seems to find me. Hannah? Hannah? I pretend not to hear. Hannah! Yeah? I look up innocently from the book I'm reading. Hannah, what are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing here, eating and chewing and swallowing? Huh? Oh, I was just waiting for Mr. R to come back. I've got a science assignment I need help with. I look really innocent, I think. Hannah, you know the rules. No eating in the halls. Come on, let's go to the cafeteria. She extends her hand to me, but I shove the rest of my apple into my mouth, get up quickly and grab my books and head in the other direction. I know she's still standing there watching me, shaking her head. She can't figure me out, and that's fine with me. No one needs to know me anyway. That's a bit of Hannah. Until she changes her heart and her mind after meeting this family of refugees, and her heart cracks open, and it's a friendship that has lasted, it's continuing to last to this day. I'd like to just read a little bit from A Free Woman on God's Earth, really just the quote from Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman and why we took the title A Free Woman on God's Earth. This is a quote, a direct quote from her. And she says, anytime when I was a slave, if I had been offered 1 minute's freedom and told that at the end of that minute I would have to die, I would have taken it just to stand 1 minute a free woman on God's earth. I would. Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman. And it goes into the story of really slavery in New England in the North and her life at the Ashleys and her quest for justice and freedom and her eventual winning of her lawsuit and her free life. She lived a free woman for 50 years after she gained her freedom in 1781. So it's a wonderful story. It's also part of the growing curriculum of many elementary schools. On my website, we have a free downloadable teacher's guide, and we have the same thing for Weeping Under This Same Moon, Billy Budd and the Bread Box, and we're developing one for 35 Days to Baltimore, where teachers can go on, and for free they can use the downloadable teacher's guide to help them when they're teaching this, if they choose to use it as part of their curriculum. So it's a great resource, and it's a great bit of history. I would like to, I'm going to read you two more things, just a little bit. This is Billy Budd in the Bread Box, and I get to sit in Herman Melville's study writing at his desk. It's an incredible honor, and we now, we have other people coming in to work in Herman's study. We call it a program we're calling Musing with Melville, where you can buy an hour and sit with Herman in his study. And I wrote this book. I didn't really know much about Melville before I started. I got this incredible position. My friend said there was an ad, a little teeny ad in the Berkshire Eagle for a writer in residence. And I said, she said, you should try it. And I said, well, I didn't really like Moby Dick in high school. And she said, try it anyway, you might learn something. And so I applied, and I got it. And I walked into his study, and the feeling was unlike any other. It was this electrifying feeling of being in a room that was filled with genius, with this man who sat there for 13 years writing not just Moby Dick, but many books, and the feeling is palpable. And I burst into tears, and I realized that it was time to reread Moby Dick, and I did, and I love it. And I started actually our Moby Dick readathon, which is now in its 7th year, starting in August. But I was learning all about Melville and his life, and his granddaughter was really instrumental in bringing him sort of back to life. And I'm just going to read a little bit. And the first line comes directly from him. He whispered in my ear, "My grandfather has a secret. He keeps it in the folds of his black coat and tucked in that long gray beard of his that nearly hides his face. I see it in his eyes, this secret. It's there when we go for our walks through the streets of the city and when we sit down for supper. I spot it when we go to the park. I notice it when he doesn't know I am looking at him, especially then. My sister doesn't see it, not even the time he took her to the park and left her there by mistake. He was so far away that day that he dropped her hand and simply walked away, leaving her alone. She was only 4 at the time. I wonder if it has something to do with the books he wrote, I should say. He only writes poems now, but when he did write books, he wrote big fat books that are difficult for me to read, and I'm a great reader. One day, I hope to read all the books he has written. That's a little bit of that. And I'm going to leave you, and actually, just wanted to let you know that Berkshire Theater Group put a play, they adapted it into a play, and it went around Berkshire County for a year to schools all over. And in fact, we are going to hopefully restage it because in 2024, it's the anniversary of the publishing of Billy Budd. So I'd like to leave you with a song from Blanket of Stars. I'm going to play it for you and follow along. Whoops.
Little bird, it's time now. It's time for sleep. Stop your flying and come back to the nest. It's so warm and cozy, and I'm waiting for you. Come here and snuggle under my wing and rest. Little bunny, come home. Come back to the den. Stop your hopping now and lie down in the grass. It's peaceful on the hillside, underneath the clouds. Sleep in the starlight, and the night will pass. A blanket of stars twinkles and covers you. The wind sings a lullaby till the morning dew. Little fox, you're tired now. Get off your feet. It's time to give up wandering all around. You've gone to the forest, you've walked along the road. It's time to pause and curl up on the ground. The bees have all gone to their hives to sleep. Fish, they are dozing in the pond so deep. In a yellow house, a young child's in bed. His parents are both sleeping down the hall. From the roof, you can hear the owl call. He sees every movement and he hears all, but there's not a sound from the horse's stall. The only sound is the swirling of leaves as they fall.
Thank you. So thank you so much for listening, and you can find me at janalaiz.com, and you can find my books there as well as anywhere they sell fine books. Thank you so much.